Good morning, everybody. My name is Representative Alex Valdez. I come to you from the great state of Colorado. Very dry this year. I'm sure we didn't get much visitation for skiing, and I think that's another reason that it's good that we're all down here doing the work that we're doing, because our climate in Colorado is certainly different than it used to be. I grew up there, born and raised, and water is becoming scarce. And so, talking about what Colorado is doing in the energy space is very complex because Colorado is both a very progressive state energy-wise, but also it's a state that has no money. And I think that there's more and more states in the United States that are dealing with this situation of having really not the resources to deploy the kind of energy programs that they want to do. So we're kind of working really hard to find ways to bring new financing mechanisms into our energy space and do all sorts of other creative stuff. So I was elected in 2018, which many of you might remember as the last normal year here on the planet Earth. Came into office in 2019. We were, things were fairly normal. We were working towards our 2050 goals of decarbonizing our energy sector completely. Things were just flying along, and then COVID happened. Well, COVID was a catalyst for the state of Colorado because all of a sudden we had so much federal money to juice our programs with. And I'm talking about programs that were revolving around electrification. That is one of our main focuses in Colorado, has been to electrify every sector that we possibly can as quickly as we can. Now, part of that picture was lost, I think, in the creation of our utopian vision of the future of electrification, and that was the generation side. And there's another thing that's really happening right now that's creating another downward pressure for us, and that is large loads. You're going to be hearing probably that word a lot in the very near-term future, and large load means data center, mostly. Now, the administration is trying to return advanced manufacturing to the United States, which I support. I think that if we do that, again, energy. So the crisis that we face, and I call it a crisis because we were sitting pretty steady at the amount of electricity that we used for something like 60 years, 50 years. We were just chugging along with what we had, what we needed, we were using it, and then all of a sudden, along comes the electric vehicle, right? Things start to change, the draw start to change. Along comes representatives like myself who believe that electrification and abundant electricity is kind of the energy model to get us out of some of our geopolitical issues and some of the other things that really challenge us as a country. So, I think we're even having a conversation in Colorado about how maybe we can advance the decarbonization effort. We're looking at opportunities, especially in advanced generations, saying how can we speed up our timeline in Colorado to actually be able to implement these technologies. And so, last year I did something that was really difficult, and that is to pass a bill that said nuclear is clean energy, right? It doesn't seem like a very hard bar to overcome. But what we really had to inspire in people is an understanding of how a good nuclear program works, which is how I came to be a fan of the technology. There's a group called NCSL, the National Caucus of State Legislators, that kind of adopts all of us when we get elected, and they teach us about different things, right? And so I was put on the nuclear working group. And I was pretty anti-nuclear. I grew up in the 80s. Every other song on the radio was about nuclear war and being afraid of it. And so I was pretty skeptical. But in that process, I was able to take a trip over to France. And I got to see an American nuclear program working very well for another country. And that was pretty frustrating because I was thinking, why am I standing next to Westinghouse and GE reactors and seeing these canister trains roll in and take the material up to Le Havre to be recycled and come back and refuel that reactor, but in my country we just have a bunch of stuff sitting around being guarded at an immense cost. How can we reactivate that fuel became something that immediately came to my mind, because when we have these conversations, especially amongst people in my party, it's about waste. We like to call it spent fuel, but it's waste. But it's not. It's fuel. It can be recycled, it can be put back to use, and it can be put back to use right where it's at. So the question becomes, how do we now connect some of those pieces in Colorado? And that's really what we sought to do by just starting with let's call it clean, right? We know it doesn't emit while it's running. We know that it runs 24/7 and creates the kind of power that we really need as we see intermittency with our renewables. Now, there's some other stuff we're doing, but ultimately it is that piece that we're trying to solve. And here's why. As the chair of the Energy and Environment Committee since 2020, so I was only in a year before I was made the chair of the Energy and Environment Committee, and when that happened, I immediately was approached by our our investor-owned utilities, and they said, we need to get approval to build a bunch of new gas, right, to keep up. And I'm thinking, well, that doesn't make much sense. We have a zero carbon by 2050, but you want to make some investments in really expensive turbine technology to run gas? This doesn't make sense. And so, we had these conversations about stranded assets, and they came to this conclusion and told me, look, Representative Valdez, here's the truth. We don't really have another option. And that's really when my mind started thinking about what are the other things that we can be doing. Where is geothermal? Where is nuclear? Where is this technology? Where is fusion? And so those were all good questions that I think we are all going to have to answer for people, because the one thing I remind everybody is that legislators we're normal people. We know what we know. And when you're talking to us about what you do, sometimes it's like, right? Especially when you're talking to somebody who's not an energy expert. So we really have to break these things down to basic understanding, right? There's a cycle of energy. One party, mine, we really want to close it. We want to make it a clean kind of repeating cycle. We think that will lower the costs. The other parties, all the above. We are too. I mean, that's what we live in today. I think the question becomes how best to use that energy. And is it good to use gas? And I'm in Texas right now, where energy is really interesting with ERCOT and everything. But is it worth it to change your heating fuel to your electricity fuel and then try to convert over to electricity? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? So you really have to look at the whole cycle and really close it up. So, we passed that bill. Governor Polis signed it. Our governor is pretty hip on nuclear and trying to work with other members of the Western Interstate Compact to create interesting pathways for that. And then just last week, we found out that Buckley Space Force Base, I call it Buckley Air Force Base because I literally grew up across the street from it, they have been selected as a site for a micro or a small modular reactor, which we are very excited about, the royal we, because it's an opportunity for us to show the economic benefits. Even though this thing is going to be behind the fences of a military base, it's going to be built by civilian contractors, and we know that's going to bring great investment into our community. So, those of you who don't know Buckley Space Force Base, it's the golf ball base. It's got all of these satellite golf balls all over it. It's NORAD. All sorts of weird stuff goes on there. I don't know anything that goes on there because even growing up in that neighborhood, all the kids whose parents worked there didn't know what their parents did. And so this seems like the kind of place where we might want to have this kind of power. And why? Intermittency, right? We're losing power. We're starting to see brownouts, blackouts, preventative shutdowns to prevent fire. And so, I think that all comes together to paint this really complicated picture that we have to solve. We have to figure out how to bridge these gaps. So I think that the thing that we really focus on in the state of Colorado that makes us interesting is we're a research university state, right? We have Colorado School of Mines. We have the University of Colorado. We have CSU, who's actually really advancing their work on fusion technology right now. For those of you who are watching that, it's very interesting stuff. But I don't know if it's in the 10-year window that we have to fill. And I'm going to come back repeatedly to this crisis that we're faced with every day. How are we going to produce 40% more energy in the next decade? How are we going to pay for that? And how are we going to meet that demand that we know is going to be there? So, economic opportunities in Colorado, we started our transition in about 2005. The voters of Colorado said enough. We have an inversion climate, for those of you who don't know. The Front Range in Colorado sits in a valley in the front of the mountains. In the winter, the air gets trapped down in that valley, and it just fills with smog. And so Colorado is often tied with Beijing. Denver specifically is often tied with Beijing for the worst air in the world. It's very frequent. And it's really a matter of nature. But that's what's driving the clean energy changes in Colorado, is our desire to just deal with this unique geographical issue that we have, to get out. I mean, we're getting yelled at by the Trump administration about our air. We are out of compliance with the Trump EPA on air quality. What does that say? They're calling us and saying, y'all got to clean up your air, Colorado. So, okay, now how do we pay for it? This is what's been really interesting to me as somebody who's talking to utilities, talking to people in Colorado about, we can't afford a nuclear reactor. We can't afford to be the first state to do fission. We can't afford to continue to burn gas at the rate we are because we use it for heat. In Colorado, for those of you who don't know, it doesn't stay warm up in the mountains all the time. And so that's it. It's money. It's about bringing together new mechanisms of developing generation. I believe there's also load reduction in this picture, and I think that will be paid for by private companies. I also think Google will be buying everyone in this room a heat pump in short order, because that is really, when we look at our roadmap, that is the only way we're going to get the kind of energy we need to keep up with the demands of technology, AI. Now comes quantum, right? I don't know how many of you are familiar with quantum. I ran a bill on it to enable Colorado's quantum hub. But in doing that, I didn't learn much about it because it is some complicated stuff. Qubits here and freezers and fridges over there. But what I could tell by walking in that room, it's going to need a lot of electricity. There were freezers at 0 Kelvin. There was wires everywhere. If we're going to lead in this world, and political leadership is about inspiring people at the end of the day. I grew up in the best country in the world. I'm living in a country that's struggling, and I plan to die in the best country in the world. In order to get there, we have to solve this first, because we believe that abundant energy is that key, both economically to unlocking industry. We can manufacture things in the United States. We should. But they're not going to do it because it's expensive. So if labor in the United States is expensive, can energy be cheaper? Can we inspire an economy that is different, and where, I'm reading in Australia, they're giving away energy. They're giving away electricity during the day in Australia because they want to keep the load on their system below 75% to not burn it up. They have so much extra power from solar and what they're doing that they have to give it away. That is the vision I have as an elected official in Colorado for what we can do. And that is to take the energy piece out of the equation economically, long term, and deliver to the people kind of an electric society, right? A society where they have their food, their air conditioning, their heat, their car, their backup energy, their medical devices. Everything runs on electricity, and that electricity is free because we overdeveloped for the data centers, they found efficiencies, and we now get all that power. So, in closing, we don't demonize large loads. We're trying to find a way to deal with it. We need money. A lot of states don't have what Texas has. Texas is a very, very wealthy state. We're envious that they have that money to spend, but it's going to have to be the private sector that steps in states like Colorado, New Mexico, some of the smaller states with larger populations. But that's what it's all about at the end of the day, is bridging the gap. And our ideas are great, but they're only good if we can figure out how to bring someone to the table to make that a reality. And that's the last thing I'll say is, don't forget to talk to your local elected officials about what you do. Not many people do that. They want to have a thing. We all want to have a thing in every area. And to have a thing in energy requires us to talk and us to help people to realize our vision of what the future of energy can look like, both in Colorado and kind of worldwide. And so I just really want to thank you for this opportunity to share kind of what Colorado's working on, our vision, and I just want to thank you all for attending, because a lot of the people in this room are going to help us, elected officials, to achieve what we're trying to achieve, which is a clean planet, a better world, and a place where we can all thrive. So thank you very, very much.